All right, let's dive into this incredible story. It's about a meeting between, well, a super powerful king and a legendary spiritual teacher. And right at the center of their whole conversation is this one question. A question that pretty much challenges the foundation of, well, everything.
So, here's the big question. Does your birth define your worth? I mean, really, think about that for a second. Is your potential capped just because of where you started? It's a heavy question, right? Well, this exact thing was bugging a king thousands of years ago. And the answer he got? Whoa, it's just as mind-blowing today. So, let's see how it all went down.
Okay, so our story kicks off with this guy, King Pasenadi of Kosala. Now, this isn't just some local mayor. We're talking about a seriously powerful ruler. And he's gone out of his way to a deer park, of all places, to have a word with the Buddha. But here's the thing. This is not a friendly visit. He has heard a rumor, something's bothering him big time, and he's here to get the real story straight from the man himself. So just picture the scene, right? On one side, you've got King Pasenadi. He's got all the worldly power you can imagine, the armies, the gold, the authority, the whole shebang. And on the other side, you have the Buddha, a spiritual teacher whose power doesn't come from a crown or a vault, but from pure wisdom and insight. It's this classic meeting of worldly power and spiritual wisdom. And the king, he doesn't waste any time with pleasantries. Nope, he cuts right to the chase. He's heard this rumor about something the Buddha supposedly said, something about the limits of knowledge. And to a king, it sounds an awful lot like a weakness. So the king, it just puts it right on the table. He says, look, I've heard you claim that it's impossible for anyone to be all-knowing and all-seeing. Now think about that. For a teacher who's supposed to be awakened, that's a huge deal, right? It sounds like a massive limitation. He's basically asking, so you're telling me you don't know everything? And the Buddha's answer here is just brilliant. He says, no, that rumor is wrong. He clarifies that he never, ever said it's impossible to know and see everything. What he actually said was that it's impossible to know and see everything at the same time. It seems like a tiny little detail, right? But oh man, that one word changes everything. And it all comes down to this one Pali word, Sakideva. It literally means at once or simultaneously. So you see, the Buddha wasn't talking about the amount of knowledge you can have, but the way you have it. It's about process, not capacity. And with that super simple, super precise clarification, boom, the king gets it. Rumor squashed. Okay, so with that little misunderstanding out of the way, King Pasenadi gets to what's really on his mind, his real concern. He wants to talk about the very structure of his society, that rigid social ladder, and this is where the conversation gets really interesting. So the king brings up the four Varnans, the social classes of his time. And he's not asking about, their careers or how much money they have. No, his question goes way deeper than that. He's asking, when it comes to the finish line, the ultimate goal of spiritual liberation, does the class you're born into give you a head start? And just so we're all on the same page, these were the four main groups back then. You had the Kshatriya, the nobles and warriors like the king, then the Brahmana, the priests and scholars, the Vaishya were the merchants and farmers, and finally, the Shudra, the laborers. And the thing is, you were born into one of these, and that was it. It basically decided your whole life. But the Buddha's answer, it just completely flips the script. He basically ignores the whole idea of birthright. He says potential has nothing to do with your class. It's all about developing 5 specific qualities. The Pahanyangani, or factors for striving. And what are they? Well, it's about having faith, being healthy enough to try, being totally honest, having relentless energy, and finally, the wisdom to see reality for what it is. So here's the absolute kicker. The Buddha is saying it doesn't matter one bit if you're a noble, a priest, a merchant, or a laborer. If you work on these 5 things, you have the exact same shot at the ultimate prize. It's not about your social status, it's about your personal effort, period. And to make this idea super clear, the Buddha uses this great analogy. He says, hey, king, picture 2 horses. One is wild, totally untrained. The other is well-trained, disciplined. Which one is going to get the job done? Well, the trained one, obviously. And he says it's the exact same with people. It's not about where they came from, it's about their training, building up those 5 key factors. Okay, so the king is getting it. He's almost there. But he's got one last question. And this is the real nail-biter, the final test of this whole idea.
He asks, all right, let's say you have one person from each of the 4 classes, and they all have these 5 qualities. They all do the work. When they reach the end, is there any difference between them at all? And this is where the Buddha comes in with his most incredible analogy of all. He asks the king to just imagine making a fire. He says you could use wood from a teak tree, a sal tree, maybe a mango tree, or even a fig tree. 4 totally different kinds of wood from completely different sources. And then he asks the king this simple, brilliant question. Once you light that fire, is the flame itself any different? Would the color change? Would the heat or the light be any different just because it came from, say, mango wood instead of teak? And of course, the king's answer is, no, fire is just fire. And there it is, the perfect illustration for his final point. The Buddha says that the energy you create through your own efforts, it's just like that fire. The final goal, liberation, is exactly the same for everyone, no matter what their background is. Just like the flame is the same no matter what wood you use, liberation is the same no matter what person achieves it. And after hearing that, the king is totally satisfied. All his doubts are gone. His questions were answered, not just with some abstract philosophy, but with logic, with clarity, and with this amazing metaphor that he could really grasp. So he thanks the Buddha and heads home, but you just know his entire way of seeing the world has been completely rocked. So the story itself ends there, but the question is now for us, isn't it? The core message is that our potential isn't defined by our starting point, but by the qualities we decide to build within ourselves. So the real question this whole story leaves us with is a deeply personal one. What fire are you kindling?